It's your boy HifiVega, and today we're going to build an enclosure for the L7X12. If you've been wondering what size box you should build for the Kicker Solo X that just dropped, this video is going to be for you. It is going to be built to Kicker specs, so we're about 3.1 cubic foot. We're tuned to 31 hertz. We have about 40 inches of port area. Everything you need to get the recommended box specs. One thing to note is this is going to be using 1.5" material, so 2 pieces of 3/4 inch glued together. I will leave a link to the box plans in the description below so you guys can recreate this if you want. But keep in mind, it is 1.5" material, so if you're going to use these plans, you need to double it up. With that being said, let's just get straight into it. Alright, so I've got all my pieces cut. Obviously I can't fit them all in this small space, so I just grabbed a few of them. And since this enclosure will be 1.5" inch thick material, I've got 2 of everything. I've got them marked 1 of 2, 2 of 2, you can see here. And that's one thing you might want to consider when you're building enclosures is mark every piece. As I'm cutting, I make sure to mark what I have. So this is the right side, 1 of 2, because we're doubling them up. This is the front baffle. The next step is going to be joining all these pieces together. I'm going to cover them in glue, spread it out nice and even, and I will use some clamps and brad nails to kind of hold this together until it dries, and then tomorrow will be assembly. All right, now it is time to make 2 pieces of wood into one. Use plenty of glue, use a spreader. An old credit card works great for this. It's flexible. You can get a nice thin layer on both sides. Then join them together. I like to use brad nails to hold them together, but there are cases in which you're going to need to use some clamps. You can see the gap here, so we correct that with clamps. Let it sit until the curing process is done, and you will be good to go. All right, so I've got all the other pieces glued up. Now what I need to do is take this template, transfer it to one of these boards. Then once I cut it out, I'll duplicate that on this so we have our double mounting baffle. And then once the box is together, I will also do a 3rd flush baffle that'll kind of tie the whole thing together. Before I cut holes, I like to go ahead and drill the corners. If you're going to be using a jigsaw to cut this hole out, realize that if you're not using some kind of guide, you're not going to have a perfect cut, and that's okay as long as you don't go too far outside the lines and make it too big. You always want to go a little smaller because you can always sand or cut a little bit more, but you can't add material back. All right, before you make that next hole, you want to make sure that this one fits and is fairly square. As you can see, this one fits pretty well and is fairly square. That looks good. It's fitting right, and it's time to cut out the 2nd baffle. Once you get that other baffle rough cut, go ahead and join the 2 together like we have done before. And you can see there's a little flaw there because, you know, they're not exactly the same size. So we're going to put them on the router table, make them exactly the same, and then we'll be ready to assemble. For assembling your enclosure, it is very, very important to dry fit it, test fit it, make sure everything's going to be okay. In this instance, I actually, since using an 1.5" wood, I've overcalculated the size here somehow, but I'm a 1/4 inch too big on the top and bottom, so I'll be able to correct that and the box will go together perfectly. Outside of that, I like to mark where I'm going to round over just so I know. I'll know that I'm going to have a piece like this here, so on this side, I will write brace. I know this back side is going to need a round over. And then I know on this side, I'm going to need a round over right here. This way I can get all my roundovers done before I assemble the box. But the one thing that I do need to remember to do is paint here before I put the top on. That way I can get back and get a nice smooth paint all the way across. At least the parts you can see. All right, now it's time to start pre-drilling the holes. On a typical enclosure, I would tell you that the glue joints are stronger than the wood itself, but in this case, since I'm joining 2 panels together, I'm going to put screws in just as a precautionary measure and maybe help draw some of those spots that aren't perfect in. I've got it marked all the way around the enclosure where I want to pre-drill. Then I'm going to take the 5-star D-wire ruler, and I think I'll use maybe every fourth hole. This is the perfect way to do some base head stuff with the D-wire ruler. Alright, we are finally here. We are to the assembly portion. Before you assemble, this is very important, dry fit it once again and make sure everything is just right. So you can see I have the pieces loosely set in here, but you want to check a few things. Check and make sure that your port width is correct, and we need 3 inches, and we're right at 3 inches. Of course, they're just sitting there, so it's not going to be perfect, but we have 3 inches throughout, so the port's fine. We have this brace here, which is going to help me maintain my 3-inch port on that corner, and I think we're done because I have the top done, the bottom pre-drilled, the back pre-drilled. So once I pre-drill this front, and we can build our port out, mark the port on the board so we know where it's at, and we'll be ready to start assembling. Alright, I skipped a few steps. You guys have seen a box go together before. Some of the things I did was round over both corners here. I went ahead and painted this black. I painted the top black as well, so that'll all be done. I just need to put the top on. After I do that, I can work on the flush mount baffle, and this box will be done. Alright, I've got the enclosure completely assembled. I've got it sanded. I've got it painted around the edges where I need it to be painted. Now it's time to coat it, and I'm going to use this Exo hide from Parts Express. Let me get set up and we will coat this thing. Then I'll do the final walkthrough and kind of show you everything about the enclosure. So I've been using bolts for speaker terminals for over 20 years, but I never considered using a T-nut until I seen Soundman do it. So shout out to Doug at Soundman Car Audio for the super cool tip. I really dig this. This is going to be my way to do this from now on. Alright, here is the completed enclosure. I've got it coated, it's dried and ready to put the subwoofer in. So I just put 2 light coats on here. Nothing crazy, just enough to get it looking decent. And as you can see here, I have 8-gauge wire ran out for the subwoofer, hooked up to the pass-through bolts like I've been using for 20 years now. And then on the outside I did each coil separately, that way it's easy for me to wire in series or parallel without removing the subwoofer. This is a very heavy subwoofer, so I do not want to be moving it in and out. So it is a 1.5-inch construction all the way around, except for the front where we have 1 extra baffle. We've got 45s in the corners rounded over the port, and this thing should be pretty stout.
It's hard to breathe, but that's alright. Hush.
I'd like to thank all my Patreon supporters, but the $6 or more members get a special shout out, and that is 2001 Monolithic, Gene Nava, Joaquin Juarez, El Fuego Audio, Travis McClendon, Brandon Hanna, William Berg, Foxboy Audio Sound Solutions, Jesus Tires, Dennis Cromwell Jr., Scott Dilbeck, D. Stewart, David Kozlik, Scott McCord, Matthew Tolberg, Cornut, Trucker 9000, Bobby Burkett, Kevin Lautner, James Childers, Baba, Thomas Marshall, Living Loud with Andy, Neil Nato, Chris Cogburn, Lars Madsen, and Old School Stereo. For as little as $2 a month, you can join the Patreon team and get exclusive Patreon-only content, including a monthly Patreon-only hangout stream. It's a really good time. You guys are missing out, and if you want to join, check me out at patreon.com/HifiVega.